Hello, U.S. President Donald Trump has designated Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a foreign terrorist organization. This is the first time Washington has formally labeled an arm of another country's military as a terrorist group. The Trump administration says the Iranian force actively participates in, finances, and promotes terrorism as a tool of statecraft. Iran has threatened to take similar action against the U.S. military.
Today, the United States is continuing to build its maximum pressure campaign against the Iranian regime. I am announcing our intent to designate the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, including its Quds Force, as a foreign terrorist organization in accordance with Section 219 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. This designation will take effect 1 week from today. This is the first time that the United States has designated a part of another government as an FTO. We're doing it because the Iranian regime's use of terrorism as a tool of statecraft makes it fundamentally different from any other government. This historic step will provide the world's leading state sponsor of terror the financial means to spread misery and death around the world.
Rosiland Jordan is standing by at the State Department where Pompeo made that announcement. We'll go to her in just a moment. First, over to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. And Kimberly, this was expected, yet it's still an unprecedented move.
Yeah, and the White House is defending it. Not only do they hold a background briefing with reporters on this, but also sending out a statement, essentially making the argument that this designation complements some of the actions that have already been in place, that this White House refers to as its maximum pressure campaign, that this designation of the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States expands the scale and scope of that maximum pressure campaign. Essentially, reporters asking, what this means for those who may be doing business in Tehran, who may not realize whether or not these businesses are in any way interwoven with the IRGC. The White House did not have an answer for that, only saying that if anyone is caught doing business under U.S. law now, this would make it a criminal prosecution. The intent in all of this, the White House says, is to force Iran to abandon what it calls its malign behavior, that Iran now has a clear choice that it can cease what the United States calls destabilizing activity in the Middle East or face the severe economic consequences.
And Kimberly, past administrations had mulled this over but hadn't taken the step. Is there something to be said about the timing? Why now?
I tried to press the deputy press secretary in the driveway of the White House just now on that. He either didn't hear my question or chose not to take it. But there certainly are many that are questioning the timing of this, given the fact that the Israeli elections are imminent, and this may be in some way to try and boost a well-known ally of U.S. President Donald Trump's, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel. So this is certainly something that is being asked here in Washington. When we asked the White House in this briefing about that timing, they would not give an answer. In fact, they did not answer the question at all, only saying that there is an opportunity to diminish the power of Iran through this designation, and that it is time for the United States to stand with the people of Iran who may not have the same views as their leadership.
Okay, Kimberly Halkett reporting from just outside the White House. Kimberly, thank you. Let's bring in Rosiland Jordan. She's joining us from the U.S. State Department. You were listening to that briefing that Pompeo gave. Just give us a sense of what more he had to say and the tone.
Well, the tone was very determined. The administration has really been pressing this issue of holding Iran accountable for its foreign policy. And the big argument that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was making is that the IRGC is the one that really drives Iranian foreign policy. And not only does it help determine Iranian foreign policy, it actively engages in trying to, as the Secretary of State and the Special Representative for Iran policy, Brian Hook, said, try to remake other countries across the Middle East in Iran's image, in essence, to try to spread the Islamic Revolution of 1979 to other countries. Mr. Pompeo also made a point of noting the support for the government of President Bashar al-Assad of Syria in that country's 8-year-old civil war. He made a point of talking about the engagement of Iran in the ongoing civil war in Yemen. And he also made a point of talking about Iran's efforts to try to destabilize the government in Lebanon by supporting Hezbollah, even though that organization is considered a terrorist organization by the international community.
Rosalind, is it possible to gauge how much support there is for this move outside of the sort of White House and State Department of the Trump administration? Because there are reports that some Pentagon officials are perhaps a little apprehensive about this move, fearing that it could in fact provoke a backlash against U.S. troops stationed in the region.
Well, certainly that question came up several times during the briefing, first with Secretary of State Pompeo and then with two senior officials, Nathan Sales, who is the Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism, as well as Mr. Hook, who deals with the Iran foreign policy right out. They all basically said that U.S. forces always have the ability and are always given the tools necessary to protect themselves wherever they happen to be deployed. There was also one question, but not as many as you might expect, about the fate of Americans, both Iranian Americans as well as other Americans who have been detained by the Iranian government. There was simply this answer from Brian Hook that the U.S. would continue to use diplomacy to try to secure their release, even though this designation of the IRGC, as a foreign terrorist organization has been imposed. And unless there's huge pushback from members of Congress, it takes effect 7 days from now.
All right. Rosalind Jordan with an update from the U.S. State Department. Thank you. So earlier on Monday, the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif stressed that his country will not let Washington go unpunished if it dares to designate the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. He also warned that Tehran will be prepared for a tough reciprocal response. Let's speak to Mustafa Khoshashem. He's the editor-in-chief of the Fars News Agency. He's joining us via Skype from Tehran. Thanks for speaking to us. So what do you expect the Iranian response to be?
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, Iranian officials have already stressed that they would, reciprocate the move, despite the fact that they are not after escalating tensions with anyone, including the United States. But apparently, Donald Trump means to, go ahead with this fully illogical move. They claim in Washington that they mean to increase economic pressures on IRGC and Iran in favor of bringing Tehran to the negotiating table, while we all know that IRGC has been targeted by the CATS Sanctions Act and those who claim in Washington that they intend to force foreign investors and businesses to escape Iran under the suspicion that they don't know if they are dealing with IRGC or not. They have already, withdrawn from the Iranian market under the CATS Sanctions Act. Also, IRGC has been labeled, has been targeted by presidential decree, executive decree 13224, that
but
imposes
surely this
harsh
adds more
sanctions.
pressure on the IRGC, and it's going to scare foreign companies when it comes to trading or investing in Iran.
No, not at all. I was explaining the same thing. Actually, when the United States, labels a group as a sponsor of terrorist groups, or it designates a group to be terrorist, much of the repercussions, economic repercussions, are the same. Maximum sanctions come in place, and such entities are placed under such harsh sanctions, and IRGC is no exception. It has come under, much pressure and economic sanctions. What is the difference? What is different is in area of security and military repercussions when a group is designated as terrorists, because then the U.S. Army would be duty-bound to target or capture this entity, and then Iran would definitely reciprocate. They would defend themselves. They have already stressed that they would treat U.S. Army as ISIL, Daesh members, and considering that both have boots on the ground in the Middle East, especially in the Persian Gulf, then you may see that crude prices would skyrocket. This means that the costs and repercussions of this illogical...
Well, you raise a good point. Then what impact is this going to have politically as well as militarily on the IRGC and where it operates in the region?
Well, this move is definitely a game changer, but not in the way that is desired by the Trump administration. You know, Iran and the U.S. Have been arch foes, but the current status of affairs that has been in limbo somehow between these two arch foes will, you know, turn spiral out of control as a result of the smallest mistakes. You know, a misfire or a story like the U.S. Marines that were captured by Iran in Iranian waters in the Persian Gulf. This could, you know, spiral out of control and end up in war. And only the beginning, you know, the initial impact would be rising crude and energy prices in the, you know, as a result of such conflicts and clashes in the Persian Gulf. Therefore, it seems that Donald Trump is forcing the whole world and the region to pay for the costs of his illogical, you know, decision-making policies and decisions. And I believe Democrats and others, if there are any, you know, wise minds left in Washington or in Europe, therefore they need to, you know, harness such crazy moves whose economic gains for the United States are rather nothing, but the security impacts and the military impacts for the United States, Iran, and the whole world would be grave and out of control.
Okay, Mustafa Khosheshem, we thank you for speaking to us from Tehran and giving us reaction from there. Let's bring in Steve Clemens. He's the editor-at-large for The Hill. He's joining us here on set. Hi, Steve. Nice to have you with us.
With you.
So my guest from Tehran was just saying this is illogical decision-making by Trump himself. What do you make of this move? How do you assess it?
It's clearly an escalation of circumstances. It takes a tense situation. It does make it more fragile, and so we'll have to see where this goes. I think so far, we've been dealing with the IRGC as a military arm. What's not been discussed is it's also a sprawling business empire. It has enormous assets inside Iran, and there are now risks for any company that does business with those engineering
firms.
Right,
which is what we were just discussing.
Yes, exactly. And there are lots of auto firms in Europe and in Japan that do a lot of business with these firms. So they will now be at risk in ways they weren't before. And the other kind of secret in our relationship with Iran, or our non-relationship with Iran, is that there's been implicit cooperation with Iran between the United States and Iran on many occasions. We saw that in Afghanistan after we had invaded Afghanistan and toppled the Taliban. They worked with us in putting Karzai in place. There have been subtle efforts to deconflict in certain regions where we had common enemies. And, you know, Iran and the United States behind the scenes have done this. This puts at risk all of that, and it takes a place like Iraq, where you have both U.S. forces, but you also have militias from Iran there. And it raises the possibility, as the editor-in-chief of Fars just said, of a crisis or a moment escalating into something forward. Because in our eyes, that military arm is now a different player. It's now a terrorist on a different league. So it does certainly make it much more fragile.
Does this, in fact, then put U.S. troops in the region at risk, as some in the U.S. seem to say?
Well, I think I believe that it may do that. What I don't know is whether we have gone to all the steps we have to kind of look at that possibility and protect forces in a way that we might not have others. Wendy Sherman, our former Undersecretary of State, who's now at Harvard University, has that the biggest change right now is that U.S. forces are at risk, because all of the other pieces in terms of sanctioning Iran, none of that really changes. We've already sanctioned Iran to an enormous degree. We've already decertified the JCPOA. There are no avenues or pathways right now that are workable. So this is a political move, the biggest result of which puts U.S. forces at risk.
Yeah, here's the thing. The Trump administration seems to be exerting what they call maximum pressure on Iran. But is it clear to you what the actual end game is here?
Well, I think right now, if you were to ask that of President Trump or his team, the end game that they would like to see is total capitulation and regime change in Iran. Now, I don't think that is shared by the broad strategic class in Washington, the national security class of people, both within the Pentagon, the intelligence community, the policy community, and look at that as an unrealistic goal. Because in the absence of any other game plan as to what we're trying to achieve, we're not seeing that. That said, Donald Trump is an erratic president. He was interested at one moment in meeting Rouhani, the president of Iran. He was, there are many people that have been looking at Iran as the sort of devil in the region, but Donald Trump likes to surprise us sometimes, and maybe in the very toughest of circumstances might be willing to meet. And he tried in the past. They reached out to the Iranian leadership in the past for a meeting. So right now things look very dire.
Right.
But we have to realize that this president sometimes can jump, as he did with North Korea, from what looked like a clear collision course into something that's very different. I'm not predicting that, but we have to leave open that
Here's the thing, though. It was expected. There were rumblings about this in the last period, yet
Right.
it is still an unprecedented move when the U.S. designates a branch of an armed forces of foreign government as a terrorist organization. How unprecedented
this makes
is
it
it?
absolutely complicated to deal with Iran on any of the formal or informal levels. It raises the risk of conflict in the Gulf. It raises conflict potential in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and Syria, and other places where we have where we cohabitate, if you will, in various conflicts. We may not talk to each other much, but we're both there. So it raises those risks enormously, and it raises the costs to our allies, both in Europe and Japan, in ways that we may not have thought through. So on the negative side of the ledger, there's quite a bit. On the positive side, this certainly does add to what the president was ostensibly trying to do, was to squeeze Iran. It's not clear where he wants to go with that.
Okay, Steve Clemens, thank you for your analysis.